Hello, I'm Amrit and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Hyperexponential, and I'm your host. I'm delighted to welcome you to the Underwriting Intelligence Podcast today. Today on the show, I'm joined by Jerad Leigh, co-founder and CEO of Supercede, the platform that transforms how the reinsurance world connects. Jerad built Supercede to digitize the entire reinsurance placement process, solving the friction between cedants, brokers, reinsurers in how data is shared and trusted. With nearly a decade of hands-on reinsurance experience before founding Supercede, Jerad brings both traditional insight and tech-driven vision to the future of global risk. Jerad, hello.
Hello, good to see you.
Good to see you again. We should also mention that you are a pro podcaster, host of your own podcast. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that before we kick off?
Yeah, so I'm the co-host with my co-founder, Ben Rose of the Reinsurance Podcast. So we love this space. We love talking about the space. We love interviewing people like yourself, amongst other experts in the industry. So for those who are wanted to listen to this and want to deep dive into reinsurance, specifically, there's the Reinsurance Podcast where you'll get to hear lots of my voice, lots of Ben talking about all things reinsurance. So we love doing that. So
I enjoy that a lot. It's one of my favorite insurance podcasts. And as you mentioned, I've been a guest on your show. So thank you for having me. Awesome. Let's jump in. So Jerad, let's talk a little bit about why Supercedes exists. So, a long time ago now, it probably feels like it. You would have seen gaps and inefficiencies in the reinsurance market. What specifically drove you to create Supercede and to digitize the placement process? I'm particularly interested in the kind of before and after. As a founder, like one of the things that I have to do with HX is kind of give people, like, make it really clear for people who are doing these kind of jobs day to day, like how bad it is, right? And then actually what it could look like in the future. So tell me a little bit about how you saw and see that and how that manifests.
Yeah, I've always been really interested with the intersection of technology and this industry. And when I first joined the industry I was in the US, but I was working on a technology team at Aon. And then Aon was starting to build placement platform technology. And so weirdly, I think when I look at your journey, you sort of went away and sort of saw something like net new and went and said, like, we can do this here. Ours is kind of weirdly different, only in that when we sort of really talking about it, we'd come from a world of post B3I, post Inrion, post RI3K, and we were sort of looking at it with this lens of going, this industry desperately wants this transition to happen. And thus far, it's not happened. And why is that? So we looked at it from the industry was calling out for this. It hasn't yet worked. But at the same time, this fundamental belief that when we retire, there's no possible way it works the way it does today, right?
Yeah.
So we went in and said, let's unpick where the solution has to sit, how you have to sort of build relationships with all of the parties. How do you build yourself as a bridge between cedants, brokers, reinsurers? Like, how do you get that model that the industry seems to be calling out for to work? And so that was the real starting point for us. When we felt we had clarity of that, that's when we sort of jumped in with both feet and started what we're doing now.
You had the, I like to say, the temerity, the irrational belief that you could make the change, right? I know that feeling. Yeah. It's nearly 8 years ago now. It's super cool. It's super cool. I love that phrase you've just said, that, like, which is a wonderful thing, actually, like to say it, like, when we retire, it can't look the same. Right. I think that's like a really great framing, even when you talk to customers, right? It's like, do you want this to be exactly the same in the next 10x years? And particularly in a market that's changing so much over the last few years and today as well. So yeah, that's great. So maybe let's talk a little bit about kind of end-to-end connectivity and kind of putting people onto a single platform. You've got one of the like most powerful and difficult challenges, right? In that, like, when your platform's at its best, it brings together cedants, brokers, and ultimately reinsurers onto a single platform. I have experienced that doing something with a single company is hard. So tell me about what it's like to like create like cross-company relationships. People talk about like multi-sided marketplaces and how effective they are once they get going, but the activation energy in that is like a real challenge. So like, tell me about what you've learned there about like managing cross-company relationships in particular.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest learnings that we had was we started with, and founders have this, and I think it's I think it's as much of a curse as it is a benefit, but they have this real like clarity of the end vision. And actually it's less clear like the early parts of that journey, right? I'm sure you guys have gone through this. And as you get bigger and as you scale, you get closer to that end vision, that clarity begins to take shape. So we always looked at it with absolute clarity of if we can improve this flow between all three parties, like it unlocks just immense value for the cedants, for their brokers, for the reinsurers. Um, and that's is true. But what we learned on the journey was we had to build part of our products, our product suite, to be like usable and valuable in what's called single player mode. Like, how do we get it
Right.
where you as a company bought this and you as a company like find deep value with it? But then we very quickly work with those companies to say, well, who are your closest trading partners? And we'll bring those trading partners on. We'll sort of bring them up to speed for how they're going to work with your data or how they're going to work with your deals. And we'll just start with that smaller, sort of very focused group of partners. And that's working well. And as you do that over and over and over, you begin to work towards all the partners have joined the platform for other partners of theirs. And then you begin to get that broader network effect to begin to take shape. But on that journey, one of the other things, the biggest learnings that we had was like how deep and closely managed those relationships are. But in a really profound way, where a lot of times you look at sort of marketplace kind of products in that sort of definition of it. And there's always this sense of like, well, who's the more powerful player? And you get them, you sort of subsidize them, and they just force everybody else onto a platform or similar. But in reinsurance, what you have is this really sensitive relationship where no matter how big the various companies, there's this sense of like, well, what would my client want to do? What would my broker want to do? It's like, well, you're one of the biggest insurance companies in the world. Surely you just dictate to your brokers. Like we can, but we prefer not to. We prefer to have this be deeply collaborative. So we've had to take some steps to be far more thoughtful around the amount of protection that they place around those relationships. And that's really valuable, and it helps us as we scale, but it introduces sort of challenges and friction points really early in the journey as you're building up those relationships and becoming that like trusted partner between them across different things like data and deal transfer.
Yeah, it's super interesting just watching you guys go on the journey, because clearly, like, you look at the momentum at Supercede today, and something is working there, right? But like breaking down this very, very sensitive set of relationships, right, between within the insurance value chain is one of the things that I think lots of people from outside the industry disrespect. Right. I think if you look at lots of they call them outside in founders, right? You and I about inside out founders came from the market, right? And then went to build technology. Whereas I think if you look at like lots of people who talk about how insurance is ripe for disintermediation, they don't really understand how sensitive these relationships are. And I think it's super cool to see some of the network effects you're building now, as you've got some of the world's biggest brokers and insurers and reinsurance on your platform. But that early investment in actually giving people the ability to do business the way they want to, rather than the way they theoretically should, is like probably a technology lesson for like loads of people to take away.
Yeah. Well, I think you've touched on, two of the words that we broadly avoid as a brand, and you guys as well, this like disruption, disintermediation
100%.
model. It's a recognition that there is certainly friction in our industry, and there's tons of inaccuracies in data and inefficiencies in flow and rekeying and duplication and all the knock-on effects that has. But if you present it as you're going to gut this industry and change it in its entirety, you actually bump into very, very little uptake. And anyone who does want to like adopt that kind of approach is sort of squashed out by all the big incumbents who are like, no, like there's certainly things we can improve, but we are going to function as we function and deliver the value sort of on a worldwide basis, right? This economic protection basis that reinsurance provides. Like they see the mission of this industry as far bigger and more important than like, obviously we're here to make profit and make money, but the industry insiders like fully recognize like the deeper economic value that the reinsurance industry plays worldwide.
Yeah, that's a really powerful framing, like positive sum, not zero sum,
Yeah.
right? Like, I think if you can go in with that, I mean, that's one of the biggest things that we're focused on at HX. I think, we've been talking a lot in the market. I'm sure you're seeing this now, particularly as the market starts to transition, right? About where the value comes from technology, right? And I think there's been so much focus on like eliminating efficiencies, but thinking a little bit more about like driving better decisions, better profit, right? Through, through whether it's providing better information or increasing the sophistication of the underwriting pricing process. That's a much more enduring value proposition, right? Then we're going to cut X, Y, Z, and W out. Like, don't get me wrong, as you said, eliminating the friction, very valuable, but ultimately setting people up to do things better is where the enduring value lasts.
Yeah, well, and there's historical precedent in our industry around the adoption of technology following that model, right? Like, I think a lot of the criticisms of our industry are lazy, right? And the industry wants to do a lot of these things, but they're prohibited in a number of ways due to historical circumstances or legacy tech or whatever it might be. But if you look at the sort of the speed by which the industry adopted the first few waves of technology was incredible, right? They actually look deeply at like, how do we understand risk? How do we evaluate and price that risk? How do we reach into new geographies or expand product offerings and all of these things, like, and they've always looked to go, okay, what do we need from a technology point of view in order to accomplish those things? And as new technology emerges, they've been very, very quick historically to like leap towards those things. But that technology has to present like a clear and defined value by which they go, yep, that does in fact help us do X, help us do Y, right? And some of, I think this is why you guys are getting the traction that you guys are getting, is there's this real clarity of going, we sort of went from sort of napkin mathing going like, well, I know that guy, he's good, so we'll give him this kind of price, or, into like the sort of emergence of true actuarial sciences in the space. And then you started adding on the power of computing in its earliest ages. And now we're entering this world by which we can leverage AI to pull in new data sources and build profoundly more thoughtful and intellectual. Like, it's just the extension of what that journey we've always
100%.
been on. Right. And I think in the reinsurance space, we're going on a similar journey. We're going on this journey that's from, well, how do you go from, supporting cedants and building programs and structures, one at a time, one geography at a time, one product at a time, to thinking on a portfolio basis, to then increasing your reach to new markets and improving how you send data out and how that data gets, sent to reinsurers. And like, it's just an extension of that journey, but you have to build you have to build a product that like warrants existing in that space. And I think sometimes people have gone, we saw this in the past, where we put this on blockchain and no one wanted to buy it, and therefore the industry's not adopting technology. You're like, kind of, but maybe more is that you've not proven yourself to be deserving of a space in that journey. Like, that the industry does want to adopt technology. But there is challenges, right? I think when you look at the shift from legacy tech to what we have now, that's made difficult only because each of those companies built truly unique flows in their internal processes. And then what the new technology that they want to buy will have to map to decades now of bespoke iterative building and internal solutions and things like that. So that's the reason you're having some slowness in this modernization wave happening now, because they adopted the early tech so soon, and then they had to band-aid over and over and over on it. It does exactly what they need it to do, but the new versions also need to do exactly what it needs to do. So there's this bridge that we're trying to cross right now.
Yeah. We could do a whole podcast on that. I think that's so interesting. That whole kind of the very complex realities of what the processes look like inside, and how you map those to like what an optimal flow looks like in the next stage. I don't know. Again, we should probably do a technology transformation podcast. Like, that's one of the biggest challenges, I think, that people don't realize needs to happen early on, right, when you're modernizing a platform. But I want to talk about something slightly different now because, you're a reinsurance expert, and I think, reinsurance technology specifically is unique in a couple of ways. One of the areas which I think is really interesting is, and I was a reinsurance pricing actuary when I started my career, so I remember this firsthand, is how much actually the reinsurance industry is built on relationships. Right, it's actually, like, in my experience, just a much more relationship driven industry, just by virtue of the fact that there's a smaller number of very large contracts out there. Right, and if you look at the kind of reinsurance broking specifics, the nature of the reinsurance kind of expertise, how it's distributed and fragmented, or allocated rather than fragmented, I think, relationships play a huge part of that. So I'd love to know what you've learned about the human side of transformation, particularly when it comes to getting people to trust software as much as they do each other. Early on in HX's life, there was this, like, oh, hold on a minute, like, this software is going to, like, make us our jobs. It's going to take our jobs, right? The very classic challenge you face. And I don't know if you felt that at Supercede, but just more generally, I'm interested in the barriers that you've seen when you're implementing Supercede, and what our listeners can learn, I think, from some of the experience you've had in overcoming them.
Yeah. Really early on, there can be this sense of um, wariness to technology to be disruptive. I think because technology companies writ large often, especially startups, often present this aggressive, like disruptive voice across every sector, that as a startup, you inherit that, even if it's not something that you're putting out, right?
Yes, definitely.
So the number of times we're like, we have never said that because you've heard it from every other startup and every other LinkedIn post that you've read,
Yes.
there's
Yeah.
this wariness that can exist. Um, but one of those things was, um, if you're taking away certain what you talk about, like data cleansing, right? When you're preparing the submission data that's going to go from an insurance company and the broker to the reinsurers, a huge amount of work that goes into that is just like janitorial. It's like cleansing columns and resetting date formats and making sure the currency, conversions are working correctly and all these kinds of things. And really early on, there was some feedback from some brokers of like, ooh, but like we do a lot of this work for our clients. And we're saying that's okay. Like you can use Supersede for that. The client can use Supersede for that, but it is just janitorial. Like this isn't, we're not taking away any of the power that you have. We're just saying, remember that data that you spent 2.5 weeks like putting in the right spots, that like, we've done that now.
Yeah.
And they've gotten through that now, and they see actually this profound shift there, because one of the things that happens is very oftentimes when we're onboarding new clients and we're going through the initial like data entry, data loading stuff, we will find mistakes made in historical data packs, right? And that's to be expected because doing this work is super hard, right?
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
there's seated read people listening to this, like they know it's not an easy task.
No.
Um, but what we found is that once you get to that point, it actually deepens the trust because there's less of this, I trust you and I know you're quite good at your job, but I'm just going to double check all the numbers that you and your team have put together here. We're going to, when the numbers come out of a system that's inherently accurate, like it's mathematically correct in every way, then you can sort of jump straight into the interesting things.
Yeah.
You sort of leave aside the how do we get to these calcs and say, here's what we're talking about. We want to do this, this, this. And then because in our platform, you have this really powerful ability to cut and change data in any way. And then all the calcs just get reset. So you start moving bandings around or, adding filters to different product classes you're going to take out. You can sit there and have this really productive conversation around what is the story we're telling to the market and what is the product that we're taking to the market, and how does the data back that story up? And you move straight into that without this, okay, we've never moved the data around in this way before. We double, triple checking. Then like it actually deepens the trust because you're spending the time around the thing you care about together rather than this sort of data manipulation piece, which always has this, note of uncertainty to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I loved your phrase, jump to the interesting stuff. I think it's really interesting, isn't it, when you talk about the things that people do. I always love the phrase that you rent software to do a job for you, right? Like that's what you do when you buy a SaaS product or a platform. And the allocation of time that people have is so much more skewed towards the janitorial stuff than they realize. And so that conversation you had there, if listeners are thinking about getting the hearts and minds kind of brought on board, it's like highlighting that, right? And like actually how you're going to shift the balance from away from the janitorial stuff to the interesting stuff, like is probably an answer to many of the questions we've talked about, including the trust building stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not here to take away the interesting stuff from you. Like that's the opposite of what we're trying to do. We're trying to give you more time for that.
Yeah. Well, and if you think about the relationship building, if I think about like your product, historically, it would have been, can I get a quote on this structure? Right. And the best you could do was get the quote on time because the amount of work that had, but now you can kind of go, you've asked me for this, but like, if we went away and did this other structure, these other two structures, we could give you something that you're adding a meaningful shift in value in a relationship that says, I can give you what you're asking for and I will, here it is. But also because I was freed up to do more things more quickly, I actually dug into this deeper and had some thoughts on what else we could do together. Could we do? And that is far more meaningful. You talk about building a relationship. That's way more meaningful than I got your quote in by close of business Thursday. Like that's not the meaning. That's table stakes.
I
So how do
love
you do
that.
more, right?
Yeah, love that. And just thinking about how that can deepen the relationships, right? Like that's a genuine value contributor, right? In terms of things. Awesome. Um, okay, so now let's talk about the future. So this wouldn't be a technology podcast, technology flavored podcast without talking about AI. You and I have had a ton of chats about this, just as friends having a coffee. But tell me, how has AI changed? I suppose two parts. How has AI changed you as a person? You're a technology leader, right? So you're going to be, an enthusiast about technology. So I'd love to know how technology's changed you personally, professionally, it doesn't matter. And then like how that's cascaded into Supercede.
Yeah. I think it gives you this profound ability to understand where there are maybe inefficiencies in your own sort of workflow, right? I think as a business leader, as companies grow, you get much better at like delegation, right? Like I probably don't need to be the person doing this task anymore. At what point you had to do all that. But what AI in its sort of current iteration is doing incredibly well is it's letting you sort of look at a huge array of things in your life with this lens of going, can that be delegated? Is there a way to move some of this so I can focus more of my energy on the things that matter? And I think that can sit in a lot of ways. That can sit with personal lens, that can sit with professional lens, but going, I get to sort of have a bit more of a curated experience with life. Like I can get summaries across email threads. I can get like, I don't need to, so it's that kind of thing. So I think is really, really powerful. And then professionally, we look at things a lot. We play around and experiment with things a lot. There's a lot of really powerful things coming around the corner that we're like really curious about. We haven't productized much of it yet, based on where our product sits, and we're more custodians of our clients' data, so we're not able to pour it through solutions. So, but we do leverage it in terms of like how we build certain things in house, how we build different funnels and channels, and it's like this sort of delegation engine that we can run through. So we're certainly watching it very, very closely. But you guys are doing a lot more on building some powerful. You're probably in the weeds of it a lot more in certain areas.
Yeah, I mean, the nature of our product, as you said, is just a little bit more amenable to the AI side of things, right? We ship an IDE, we ship a code development environment. If we didn't have a world-class coding agent in there, it would be remiss of us. But I love the phrase you said, just, thinking about the things you delegate. I was doing something actually, again, like you, very, very in on it in the product, but also inside the company. Last night, I was building something to help me analyze some interview transcripts that I've got for an important search I'm running at the moment. And it just occurred to me how unspecific I am when I often delegate work. right? And you cannot afford to be unspecific with an AI, right? Because if you do that, you get garbage. And one of the things that's made me really reflect, because look, we're both CEOs, right? A huge amount of our jobs, we'd be not doing our jobs well if we weren't good at delegating. And this is a skill I've actually had to really learn. Like, I'm a doer, right? You know, most founders tend to be like one of two prototypes, right? And I am definitely a doer more than a delegator by default. And that's a weakness at the 250 person scale that we are now, right? But one of the things that AI has actually helped me with is like, if I'm going to give this job to anyone or anything, like, what is the very precise intent I have? I don't know if this affects you, but often now I actually spend quite a lot of time like thinking about the prompts, and almost like I have like I go to AI to help me make the prompt. There's probably like a lesson inside there, as you said, just thinking a little bit about how you frame what you delegate, how you delegate.
I think this is where there's this transition and maybe bridge between how we do that and real world interactions. Because you're exactly right. I've been spending a lot of time over the last sort of year, like really increasing the context that I give to everyone on the team. Because I realize, as you sort of point out, that sometimes with humans, you take for granted that, especially as like a founder and a CEO, you take for granted that you've thought about this problem for 1,000 hours. And they've thought about this problem over the course of reading the email you sent them, right? And then there's this frustration of like, why are they not getting to where we want them to get to on it? But the AI piece, you're right. It's like, weirdly, it's allowing you to go, if I just say, build me X, and it's like a super lazy prompt, you're going to get a bunch of lazy garbage out. But if you build a very thoughtful, detailed prompt with detailed structure, and then the output you can get is much more powerful. And I think that also translates into how we communicate with team members and colleagues, even on a personal basis. Like, do they know everything they need to know? Do they know what I'm looking for? Do they have a clear expectation for how I'm going to evaluate, the return that they bring me? So I think it lends you a way to kind of build muscle memory around clearly articulating what you want. That translates both beyond the prompts and into human interaction as well.
Yeah, exactly. You know, one of the things that I often reflect on with AI is the reality of the situation is these are consumer products, and in the era that we live in today, consumer products have to optimize to engagement. And so one thing that I see is that all of these tools are so obsequious, right? They try to say yes to everything you do. Whereas, if you went to a human and you gave them a stupid suggestion, the first thing that they would probably do is go, could you help me clarify that?
Walk me through your thinking on this.
Right. And like the vast majority of these tools, you have to go like extremely like stupid before you get challenged by an AI, right? And it's just so interesting. Like, there's just so much meta learning there, right? In all the stuff we've been talking about.
But it is interesting when we look at the next sort of 5 years. I'm very, very curious to see how quickly some of these things develop. Like, there's certainly hiccups and bumps, and there's still some things that they're ironing out. But the speed by which it's moving lends itself to being one that you have to keep tabs on what's happening. You have to keep testing it. And maybe you test it and you go, it's not quite ready, but that's okay. But it doesn't mean that you sort of write it off. You go, okay, that thing isn't good for that specific purpose I tested it with now. But I should probably come back in a quarter, or 6 months or a year, and reassess my position on some of these things, because it's a bit short-sighted to go, it didn't work for that one thing I wanted today, therefore it's not good at that writ large or full stop.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like, it's like when it's that concept of extrapolating what you see today instead of realizing that it's going to change, so much between now and the point that you're extrapolating to, right? So thinking about, you were just talking about the 5-year horizon. Maybe let's zoom in to the 1-year horizon. So look, your reinsurance product provider. Again, thinking about my life as a reinsurance pricing actor, I'd be in the thick of 1/1s right now. Right, you've just come back from Monte Carlo. You've got your ear to the ground with respect to what's happening in the market. What are you seeing going into 2026 that you think is going to just be so important for anyone providing technology in this space? What insights do you have to share for people using or providing technology in the reinsurance space?
I think there's a renewed interest in finding solutions that solve real pain. I think people are being actively given budget to do so. I think the spike in AI has incentivized businesses to go, okay, we need to find ways to invest in and look for solutions. Um, there seems to be, to our benefit, a renewed recognition that, an insurance company or an insurance, reinsurance brokers, reinsurers are not technology companies. So whilst there's some tooling they should be building in-house for like core piping and types of things, like there's probably someone who's doing this full time that can do a better, more thorough job. And I think that will continue to be the position for a while. So there's a lot of renewed excitement there. I also think in the London market specifically, with the delays in Blueprint 2 stuff, people are, because they sort of kicked it out a couple more years now, there's a real ability to take advantage of the budgets that have been set aside for that. The people are now going, well, we're not going to do nothing with these budgets for the next couple of years. We surely can, find something to have a meaningful impact on our business. And I think that's a positive trend for technology companies in our space more broadly.
Yeah, definitely. The mantra of just like start now, right? I like the phrase "start small now," right? It's just so powerful. Like, there's definitely, I've seen something very similar where there's been a little bit, there's the kind of overwhelm, paralysis analysis. This new technology's come along. Everyone's trying to work out what to do. As you say, there's then broader market trends with the Blueprint 2 stuff, and now it definitely feels like people are like, okay, I'm going to form an opinion and I'm going to go. And now it's going to be really important. I think you're completely right. I think 2026 in many sectors is going to be quite an era defining sector. I know that's quite a grandiose thing to say, but I think you're seeing the technology, as you say, hitting production. I think there's something else you touched on there. I think it has to be real value, right? I think there's been a ton of sexy looking demos that are not productionizable. Right. And I say that we've done loads of those internally at HX2, right? Empowered by vibe coding, the ability to prototype and throw away. There's been way more experimentation in the company than I've seen in, possibly since our seed stage days, actually. But as you say now, like, has to be real value, has to be positive sum, and has to be something that people can use for a long time.
Yeah, I think you're seeing this. This is the one thing I wish happened more quickly in our industry, this sort of this mindset. But my hope for the carriers and the brokers and the reinsurers is more of a willingness to say we want to start small and test things and then scale from there. We still do have a tendency, from what I've seen, to kind of go, great, can we do this across the entirety of our business on a worldwide? And then those projects get drug out and slowed down and fall over, and actually the likelihood of those being successful go up radically if you say we're going to start with this team or this geography, we're going to build it up, we're going to prove, these are the metrics we're going to judge it on, and that works. We're going to go, if that works, we're going to do these next 4, and then if it works, we're going to go start planning that sort of 2-year global rollout. You're seeing a bit of that with some companies, but more often you're still sort of wrestling with companies that want to just do everything all at once, eat the elephant in one bite, and that will never work. And no matter what you're trying to do, that will always have its challenges. So companies are beginning to sort of go, okay, and I think AI does a really powerful way of building this muscle memory. It's much easier to say, I'm not going to build my entire company on AI, but I do want this one widget. And if that one widget works really well, then I can maybe expand from there. I can use AI to help me add a bit more to that thing, or expand it into these different sort of adjacent areas. And I think that's a good sort of metaphor we can take, or less learning we can push to other places. They don't need to do all of it at once. Just find a point of value, focus on that, evidence that value, and then expand it from there.
Yeah. You made the joke about what will we do when we retire. I wonder whether we retire, we'll still be trying to convince the industry not to board the ocean, eat the elephant. But we can keep trying, Jerad. We can keep trying.
It's our life's work now, isn't it?
Exactly right. Well, I think that's a wonderful place to wrap up. Jerad, it's been absolutely wonderful to have you on the show. Maybe just before we wrap, like, where can people find out a little bit more about you, the fantastic work you and Supercede are doing?
Yeah, everything you want from us is at supercede.com. Supercede with a C, like seeding, reinsurance pun there. So supercede.com for everything there. If you want to follow the Reinsurance Podcast, also the reinsurancepodcast.com, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts like this one.
Absolutely. We'll make sure we put a link to that in the show notes. Jerad, it's been absolutely wonderful. I was thinking of calling you old friend, which is funny because we're definitely friends. And I think more than half a decade of doing this probably makes us qualify as a little bit old.
Yeah, and we're old. We're getting old as well. So
good. Well, all the best. Thanks very much, Jerad.
And you. Thanks, Amrit.
That's it for this episode of the Underwriting Intelligence Podcast. I hope you found it useful and thought-provoking. If you did, don't forget to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you know someone in insurance who'd find this valuable, please share it with them. I'm Amrit, and I'll be back in 2 weeks with more insights that matter in the insurance world. Until then, thanks for listening.